So the new Mega 8 RGBWW has arrived. I'd say it's a substantial improvement on the case design. The wheels seem to be much more rugged. It's got decent handles on either end. Zipper seems much improved, and the general materials I think are a lot better. So we're going to take a quick first look at the new Intellytech Mega 8 3.0. This is one in the new 3.0 Mega series. This is the RGBWW version. It's the largest one in the series. This is 3x5. They make 4 different sizes. I believe it's 3x4, 3x3, and 2x4. And they're all available either in bicolor or in full spectrum RGBWW. To my right here is the original Mega 2.0. Now I bought this, I don't know, 3-4 years ago maybe. I got one when they first came out, and I added 2 more. And I've been super happy with them. In terms of a value brand light, there's a lot to love about this original Mega. So the original Mega, strictly bicolor, 3,000 Kelvin to 10,000 Kelvin, which is identical to this, also 3,000 Kelvin to 10,000 Kelvin, except of course this has full green magenta correction and is full RGBWW. So the original Mega came with a OEM frame like this. Now I've modified mine. The original one came with essentially like a half grid that was sewn in. So I sliced that out and then lined the perimeter with Velcro, and I had the rag place make me up a series of diffusions. This is Mega Cloth. I also had half soft frost, full grid, half grid, quarter grid. So I had a selection of diffusion. And this frame was very, very simple. It just had like bungee straps on the outside, and it would just literally slip over the frame. And that was the whole procedure to get this on. So you didn't have a huge amount of distance between the emitters and the diffusion, but I found that it worked okay. Now, over the course of the time I owned these, I was always having conversations with Aaron at Intellytech about the things I didn't like what were the pros, what were the cons. And of course I was giving him a lot of the cons because I was thinking about what's going to happen in the next version, what would we want, what are the issues. And so I think, what's interesting about these lights is they're made for travel. They're made to go into a relatively compact case and then be assembled into a large soft light. So I don't think it's that much different than, say, a Lightgear Light Matte Spectrum or Light Matte Plus or the Aperture F22Cs, for example, or even say a Hudson Spyder. I mean, they all take a bit of time. They take 5-10 minutes to build. The Spyder, you got to splay out, you got to get the softbox on it. The Lightgears, you got to put the poly skirt and the back plate and the whole thing. And I don't think this is any better or any worse. It's the same thing. It takes a little bit of time to build. I saw people complaining on Luke's video on Instagram. Luke had the slightly smaller 3x4 RGBWW, and yeah, it takes a little bit of time to build, but I think it's one of the trade-offs. Oftentimes for me, yes, I have a 3-ton truck. Sometimes, like on the last job I did, I pre-built this, so when I got the set, we were under the gun in terms of time. I was ready to go. I pulled it out of the hamper and boom, we were ready. But a lot of times I'm working out of my SUV on a small dock chute, and so I can't leave the thing built. And that's true of my light mats as well. Sometimes I leave those built on the truck, but in a car, with the Hudson Spyder, etc., I need to, get that stuff really compactly into the back of the SUV. So for me, it's a non-issue. It's just one of the trade-offs of having a large light that can, be packed away somewhat compactly. So one of the problems was they designed a pretty ingenious collapsible frame that collapsed down pretty small. You'd lock it into place. The initial Mega 2 had a problem. It had a kind of a stubby little baby pin that wasn't great. And the bigger problem was it had a lot of play in the armature. So when you rig this, if you wanted to rig it off a menace arm or overhead, it had some wonkiness, and oftentimes I'd have to grab it with the long arm or somehow secure it so it would remain in place. So the frame is pretty much the same, but they've dramatically improved it, so it doesn't have nearly as much play. The back crossbar has some ribbing on it so it doesn't slip in the clamp, and just the overall quality of it, although it's essentially identical in the way it expands and collapses, it's much beefier, and I think a major improvement. So as you can see, they've went to a deeper box design, which Velcros onto the front. There's 4 elastic straps that hold it on, and then you Velcro it in place. And so the difference is, on the original Mega 2, they had a bungee system, and these bungees would often get lost. It was quick to put together. You'd bungee it around the perimeter, and then you were good to go. In this, so to the 3.0, they've went to a sort of clasp strap, which is very quick to put on, and it cinches up, and it's sewn into the mat, so they're not going to get lost. And then, I don't know if we can see this here, but this has ridges in it, and the new clamp has a much more solid and a longer baby pin. And it also, let me see, it comes with a sort of female baby to female baby, so you can articulate it with a locking clamp. I sometimes tend to just put it into a grip head. But this clamp is much more solid and it really doesn't have a whole lot of play. So even off of a C-stand, even this 3x5 off of a C-stand, I've been able to articulate it, double bag it, it's fine, or on the end of a menace arm. And some of the other improvements, I think generally the mat construction is better. They've beefed up the header cables, they beefed up the connection point to the back of the mat. So build quality wise, I think they've done a pretty good job on this new 3.0. Show you this, now that they've gone to the sort of light gear style interchangeable diffusions, you can get any diffusion you want. So if you want to get Rag Place or somebody, Grip House, whoever, to make you up any diffusions you want, that's possible. Now, I think one of the nice things they did was they went to a essentially snap grid style, similar to say DOP Choice or other folks that have that snap grid. So the LCD really does hold its shape. I'll just try to get this in quick. So that's good enough for a quick look. So my only real complaint about the LCD, and look, it's a free OEM included LCD, so it's hard to complain about something that's included at at a very reasonable price. One of the things I don't like is that it is a relatively shallow LCD. So if you stand off, I tend to like LCDs that are somewhere between 40 and 50 degree spreads. So if I stand at 45 degrees, I can still clearly see some of the light. I almost have to be at about here. So I would say maybe 70 degrees, 80 degrees, something like that. So it's still functional. It's still cutting off light. It's just not quite as narrow. And that's due to the fact that the cells are not deep enough. So at some point I may have another LCD made up that's maybe 2.5 inches deep and is more of a true 40 degree as an optional extra. But this certainly is functional. It's not horrible. I used it just the other day and it worked perfectly fine. So it really depends on your particular lighting situation and how much spread is acceptable. But it's a much improved LCD over the original for sure. So one of the things that came up when we were, Aaron was talking about the possibility of going to RGBWW and coming out with a full spectrum large mat or series of mats, right? So we talked about what Arri did with their European brick lock light. Now that's a light that most of us in the US have not even heard of. I wasn't even aware of it until last year. And when I was looking into what Arri did with that, it's a small panel light that sort of interconnects, and it's an RGBWW panel light. And what they decided to do is go to a 4 or 5 to 1 emitter ratio between the white emitters and the RGBW emitters, right? So basically you get a lot more output in your daylight tungsten spectrum, but you still maintain the ability to have a full spectrum light and to be able to skew your colors. So I think smartly, Aaron decided to go with the 4 to 1 emitter ratio on the Mega RGBWW series. So that makes these RGBWW mats as bright as the bicolor version. So in my book, I don't see any reason that you would want to get the bicolor version of these unless price was really an issue. Because I think just having green magenta correction is worth the price of admission, even if you never use color. You don't use saturated color, or you don't find yourself using color that much. Just being able to correct and zero out your green magenta shift. Now there's not a huge amount of green magenta shift as I went through the Kelvin temperatures. At 3200, this was spot on. At 56, it was ever so slightly green, which again, you can correct out and zero out in the ballast. And I think, there's just sort of a trend right now in terms of bicolor. A lot of cob lights now are moving to adding green magenta correction. For example, the new Nanlux 2400B, the new Aperture large bicolor light is going to have green magenta correction. The Nanlite 4s, I think the new 300 and 500 have now added green magenta correction. So I think we're going to see that more and more on bicolor lights, because that's kind of the Achilles heel. Now, a lot of times, that subtle difference in green or magenta, we're not really going to see. But when you get into a situation where you're in, for example, a white kitchen, and you've got 4 different manufacturers' lights, you might see like a 1/16 of a difference, especially if one's skewing green and one's skewing magenta. So I'm generally, as a sort of course over the last year, moving out most of my cob lights that are daylight only or bicolor. So I've sold my Aperture 1200D, I've sold my 600Xs, I've sold my 600Ds, and I've replaced them with, like, for example, Orion 300s and 675s, Aperture 600Cs, the Aperture F22Cs and 21Cs, the Spectrums. So I have I'm slowly getting up to, Nanlux 900C. So I'm trying to move everything to full spectrum, because I think the genie's out of the bottle, being able to have that color control, even if you don't do super saturated colors that often, being able to match a magic hour, or be in a supermarket under fluorescent lighting, or outside under sodium vapor, or being able to match these, sources, I think becomes really important, and also really quick. So I think that was a really smart choice, going to 4 to 1 emitter ratio. This is a 400 watt light. The original was, I want to say 320. Now on paper, this was supposedly only marginally brighter at daylight or at tungsten, but I measured it yesterday at about 10 feet, and I felt like I was getting 1/2 to 2/3 more stop out of this than the original 2.0. So I'll show you. This was the original 2.0 ballast, which wasn't a bad design. It was a pretty basic menu. You could get it in gold mount or V mount. It ran off 14.4 bats. And you had RJ45 connections, so you could put a dongle and you could hook this up to blackout. Now the issue was the light was too steppy for in-shot cues. The light is not cueable, but you can make your intensity and your color adjustments on the fly via blackout or luminaire or what have you. So it wasn't a bad ballast at all, but they've beefed up and went to a much nicer ballast for this. Is for the obviously the RGBWW version. So when you first turn the light on, you're presented basically with this menu, and then if you want to get into CCT, you hit select. You've got a blackout option. you've got fan on and off, and you go back to your menu if you want to go into special effects, RGB, HSI, Bluetooth. You got your DMX settings. You've got a gel library, which is kind of nice because you've got a selection of both Lee and Roscoe gels. And then dimming curves, you get the choice of your usual S-curve, exponential, log, linear. And that's the basic menu parameters. On the side, you've got your DMX. You've got a powered USB port. This is the non-CRMX Ballast, so if you wanted to stick a dongle in and power it, you could. You've got your additional DC 48 volt input. And then this is obviously the gold mount. You can also get V mount. It will not run off 26. It's only designed for 14.4 batteries. And then you've got a clamp to mount it on a stand. So that's the basic ballast operation. Now this ballast doesn't yet have the CRMX option. Those aren't shipping for another month or so. So eventually Aaron will switch this out for me for the CRMX version. And Aaron is in the process now of getting Jeff Brink at Blackout, the profiles, and Bert over at Gaffer's Control. So eventually we'll be able to control this wirelessly, and then that'll be the point where we can determine, is this a cueable light or not? I don't yet know how well this will perform for in-shot cues, in-shot crossfades, etc. So that's down the pike. I made some quick notes just about TM30, and again, like I said earlier, the metrics are quite exceptional. I think the 2.0 at 3200 was giving me 3267.0023 DUV and a TM30 of around 94. The 3.0 was coming in at 3212, so almost spot on, and 000 on the DUV, so no deviation on green magenta, and a TM30 of around 96. So maybe a couple points better on the TM30 at 3200, and then at 56 I was getting 5675.0009. So very, very slight deviation, which obviously is correctable with the green magenta adjustment, and a TM30 of 95, whereas this one was coming in at 5717, also pretty close, 0.0018. So twice as much deviation on this one, but still very minimal. And a TM30 of 95, so almost identical TM30 readings at 56. So I think there's some subtle improvements in color metrics, and I did one other test of both of these at 10%, and they both were still at 94, 95 TM30 values with very slight shifts in the Kelvin versus 100%. So I think overall, you know, like I said earlier, a lot of these mats, they're all very good. They're all in the low to mid 90s in terms of the TM30. So I've been very happy with this. I've only had it out on one job so far, but I'm looking forward to maybe adding a 3x4. I think the 3x4 size seems really nice too. This is in a large wheel case. The smaller sizes are not in wheeled cases. They get obviously proportionally smaller. So yeah, that's the Mega 3.0, the Mega 2.0. No, I have no intention of getting rid of these. These are still a great light. I rent these for about $150 a day. So like I said, having two of these behind a 6x for beautiful soft interview key light, you know, that's a $300 rental. It's like less than a sky panel. And the beauty of using these behind a 6x or an 8x is they only have to be this far away. So when we're working in tight quarters, which we often are in New York City for an interview, I can have a very big soft source with a very, very narrow, small footprint. And I expect I would maybe get another one of these. This would be great through an 8x. Well, I came back today. It's hot as hell here in New York. In the shop, I think it's like 95 friggin' degrees. But I wanted to show this lantern that I got. So this is the basic lantern you can get for all four sizes. This, of course, is the Mega 8. And like a lot of lanterns, it's a little finicky to build. You've got those rods, you got to slide through the little, what do you call it? You know, the little holes here that you got to get them in. And there's 3 rods that join together. So you have 3 rods one direction, 3 rods another, and that gives it its shape. But you know, once you get the rods in, it goes up pretty quick. It Velcros very nicely right to the frame. And then you've got an additional strip of Velcro all the way around the perimeter. So you have your standard Mega 8 skirt, and you've got the vertical Velcro so you can roll it up and you know, get the cut that you want out of your pancake lantern. I think it'd be nice down the road, maybe if they offered a say unbleached Muzz option would be nice. And a lot of people that you know, use light mats and light gear and so forth like to put unbleached Muzz on, so that might be a nice option. You could keep the skirt and the rods and everything and just get a, you know, have a secondary option for your fabric. And I think lastly, you know, we're looking right now at the first firmware out the door. So this is a brand new light. Just like a lot of other lights, there are going to be things we discover about the light that maybe we'd like to improve, you know, through feedback from users. And one of the things I've been talking to Aaron about is right now it's a very basic HSI RGB mode and a basic gel library with Lee and Roscoe colors, right? So on, you know, some of these more expensive lights that have advanced HSI mode, it allows you to set your white point, which I think is really useful and would be kind of on my wish list of future firmware upgrades. So at the very least, you could select, say, 3200 tungsten or 5600 daylight that you'd like to lay your particular lead gel color over. Or if you're in HSI mode and you want to select your base color, that would be super useful. There are some lights that allow you to select any white point. So you could dial in 4400 Kelvin onto which you overlay a Lee color or a Roscoe color. So I think down the road, looking to improve maybe how this full spectrum light functions in a more advanced way would be super useful, and I'm hoping they can maybe integrate that down the road. But straight out of the box, you've got basic HSI, basic gels, basic RGB mode. So you could certainly dial in a green or a red or an amber or what have you, no problem. So anyway, that sort of wraps it up with a little extended first look at the new Mega Cloth 3.01.